All right, we're still going to do page 334. Once again, for you at home, please look at your book, page 334. There's a section called options, an option. We did not, or it's not on the slides, and in the option, what's an option? We talked about this once before. It's the only unilateral contract that we have, right? And we talked about an option is the right to purchase property in the future at a price we negotiate today. And we talked about the lease option. Here's where that option comes in. There are several different options we use in the leasing world. Most notably, the first option that we have is what's called a renewal option. I have the right as a tenant to renew my property. Typically, that renewal option is at the mercy of the tenant, as long as the tenant is in good standing. Okay? So what that means is, and think about this, if you're a landlord and you got a tenant and they are in good standing, which means they've paid all their bills and they're a good tenant, wouldn't you want them to renew? Yes. So you leave it at their discretion. Now, if they're behind in their rent, that's a whole different story. They're not in good standing. Now, you may say you can't exercise that option. I have exercised options in this room at least twice. I got a 3-year lease, and then I got an option with another 3-year lease. I just exercised one about a year ago. I'm in good standing. He called me up and said, hey, your leases are going to expire. What are you going to do? Hey, I'm going to stay. Okay, no problem. I'll send you over a new lease, sign it, we'll move on. So it's a renewal option. We have got these things called a purchase option, which we discussed earlier. That's the right to buy. In a lease, there's a special purchase option called the first right of refusal option. The first right of refusal option is the option that the landlord has given the tenant to basically have first chance to buy the property. If the landlord says, I want to cash in and retire, I'm going to sell this building, but Raymond has the first right. So he would come to me and go, hey, look, market value's $1.1 million. Do you want to buy it? I have the first chance to go, yes. Okay, let's sell it. If I say no, I do not exercise my first right, he then can take it to market and sell it on the open market. So a first right of refusal gives a tenant first shot at buying the property. I do not have it for this building. Typically, it's hard to give a first right of refusal. Well, it's impossible to give it to multiple people. And typically, a lot of multi-tenants don't have them in there. It's the single tenant building like the vet store, the vet next door, Jim Hill, who's the only tenant. That's a very common, good question. In a multi-tenant scenario, you will not see a first right of refusal very often. I'm not saying it can't be done. He could give preference to one of the tenants for some reason. Maybe it's the biggest tenant. Maybe it was the first one in place. Maybe it's his one he just likes. I don't know. But typically in multi-tenant scenarios, you do not see first right of refusal. Randy Faulkner does not own this building anymore. That's how I found out I don't have first right of refusal. When I got a call from the new owner that said, I'm the new owner, I'm like, son of a, wish he'd have let me know that. All right, so let's get back to it. How are we doing so far? Now we've talked about it, let's go over some of the major types of leases. The very first lease I want to talk about is called a gross lease. A gross lease is when a tenant pays the landlord money, i.e. a gross amount, and then the landlord goes out and pays his bills. So the tenant pays $800 a month, and then the landlord pays the real estate taxes, maybe pays the HOA fees, all right? This is typically what you would see in the residential world. It's called a gross lease. And if you think about that term we talked about the other day, gross income, and then we subtracted out all the expenses, that's where the term comes from. The landlord is getting a gross amount of money, and then he pays all the bills and gets what's left. It's called a gross lease. This next lease is called a net lease. The tenant pays the landlord money, but now listen carefully. The tenant pays the landlord's bills. So on top of the rent, the tenant goes out and pays a portion of the landlord's bills.
So that would be like most apartments, you pay your you pay your light, your electric bill, your...
Like in a residential apartment where you pay one and their landlord, and you pay your own. Utilities are usually not one of those bills. Tenants pay their own utilities, even in a gross one. This is mainly your commercial building. It's called a net lease. The golden goose of this is what we call triple net. Or sometimes you hear it called net, net, net. 3 of them. What that's saying is this. The tenant is paying the landlord rent. And then the tenant pays the real estate taxes on the property, pays the maintenance on the property, and pays the insurance on the property. So the landlord collects the net amount of money. So let's recap. Gross lease, the landlord pays all the bills. In a net lease, the tenant pays all the bills. These are the two extremes from way over here to way over there. And there's everything in between. Dollar Tree is a double net. They pay the taxes and the insurance, but their belief is the owner of the building should maintain it. So they'll sign a double net lease. Most of your big publicly traded companies do triple net leases. Now, what's the reason for that? Here's the cool thing, and this probably stems back from when we being the country, created this financial machine years ago. In these two examples, if the interest rate, if the real estate taxes go up on the gross lease, what happens to the landlord's profits? They go down because they're paying the expenses. In the commercial world, if the real estate taxes go up, what happens to the landlord's return on his investment? Stays the same. Doesn't matter. Because he's not paying it. And because it stays the same, that allows that commercial guy to actually borrow money and promise a certain return on that money, because that return would never change. This is where these big institutional guys like Simon how they can sell stock, and they tell their potential stock buyers, you buy Simon stock, you're going to get a 4% return on your money. Well, how can they guarantee that? Well, technically they don't guarantee it, but how can they make that boast? Because they know their return is fixed. Nothing changes that return. Taxes go up, they're still getting their 8% return. Pay you 4. Insurance goes up, maintenance goes up, doesn't matter. That's why how all these people borrow this commercial money. and use investors that say, I'll give you 4% because I've got a tenant in that's paying me 5.5%. I'll give you 4 of it. I'll make 1.5 because my return's not going to change throughout the years. Where in the residential world, it will change. This is the whole point. If you guys have heard of that company, AH4R, American Homes for Rent, that came into the Indy market about 3 years ago, I kept telling everybody that model won't sustain itself because they were paying the maintenance and those tenants were going in and trashing the place and then tearing it up and they'd have to go in and fix it. Their return was variable. Not in the big heavy-duty commercial world, it's not. It's fixed because of this triple net lease. You could also get into this whole thing about CAM charges. A CAM stands for Community Available. No, it doesn't. Thanks, John. Where'd that come from? Common area maintenance. Buildings that have common areas, like this building has a hallway and a lobby, somebody has to pay for it. Parking lot. If the parking lot gets pushed for snow, tenants pay for it. But because there's 12 units in here, I would only pay 1/12 of the snow bill or 1/12 of the electric bill, all right? So that's called common area maintenance. That's another thing that can be wrapped into there. Percentage lease. If you didn't think that was greedy, this is even better. A percentage lease is where the landlord participates in the upside of their tenant, meaning the tenant pays a percentage of their gross income. As they do better, their lease goes up because they get a percentage of the profit. Well, actually, that's a lie. They get a percentage of the gross number, typically, before profit even expenses come out. Very common in the restaurant world, like Palomino downtown. Simon wanted like $75 a square foot, and they said, that's too much. He said, okay, I'll take X percentage of your business as your rent. They said, sure. No, back up. It was like $35 a square foot. And they said, we'll take X percentage. By the time they got done, they ended up paying like $75 a square foot because the business did really well. The landlord was smart enough to understand, hey, they'll probably do pretty well, so I will take a percentage of that on the lease. Now, in order to make sure that they don't get totally hosed, typically it's a base plus a percentage. All right? So the landlord may say, hey, look, it's $1,000 a month plus 4% of whatever you do. That way, if the restaurant has a really bad month, at least the landlord gets his $1,000 that month. So typically it's a base and a percentage. On the exam, everybody make sure you're listening. Please read the word base and a percentage is different than the word base or a percentage. Because some of them are a base or a percentage, whichever's higher. Some of them are a base and a percentage. So on the exam, make sure you read that word. Is it a base or is it a base and? Let's change audio.